Let's begin learning about how to use After Effects. We'll start off by looking at the overall interface, and then in the next couple of videos, I'll create a basic project and teach you the ins and outs of After Effects. When you first open After Effects, you're going to see a window that looks like this. This is a place that you can either start the After Effects tutorials or you can create a composition from footage. In addition, you can create a new project or open an existing project. I generally close this window and go right to the After Effects interface because you can get started working on a project right here. Now, before we get started, I want to show you how you can change your window layout. Your window layout might not look exactly like mine. In order to change the window layout, you're going to go to Window, Workspace. This will allow you to change your workspace to the different preset settings, and in addition, you can create your own workspace and save it, and then default to that. I'll be using the default workspace for now, and if for any reason you're already in the default workspace and it does not look like mine, just click Reset Default to Saved Layout, and you should end up with something that looks like this. In the After Effects workspace, we have a couple of different panels that are going to be open by default. The first one is the Project panel. The Project panel is where you'll import and organize media assets that you'll use in your project. I'm going to start off by creating a couple of folders, so I'll come down to the bottom and create a folder. I'm going to create a folder called Compositions. Compositions is something that we're going to be using all the time, as they are the areas where we will actually build our projects. I like to name my composition folder with an underscore so it stays on top of all of the other folders. The next thing that I'll do is I'll go ahead and create another folder, and we'll just call this footage. If I was to import in any videos or any files, I could put them here. And obviously you can make as many folders as you need to. So you can make a folder for stills, you could make a folder for audio, however you want to stay organized. I do recommend that you use the folders because as you start to work on a more complex project, your project bin will get filled up and it's much easier to find things if you keep things within folders and name them accordingly. The window to the right of the project pane is our composition window. This is where you preview your project as you create it. So once we actually create a project, we'll be able to see what we're doing here. By default, this allows us to create a new composition, which will just allow us to create a new blank composition, or we can create a composition from a footage file. If we click Create Composition from Footage File, we're going to be prompted to import a file, and then our composition settings are going to be based on the imported footage settings. We'll start off by just creating a new composition. This is going to open up the composition settings, and I'm just going to call this Animation 1. You can use any of the preset settings that are part of After Effects, and clearly there are plenty. I'm going to keep my settings at 1920 by 1080, and I'm going to be using a frame rate of 29.97 frames per second, which is basically 30 frames per second. You can clearly make the physical size any size that you need. So if you don't find any of the sizes that are going to work for your project, you can just plug in the values here. By default, lock aspect ratio is checked. So if you wanted to use something other than a 16:9 aspect ratio, you'll need to uncheck this. For the pixel aspect ratio, we're going to just use square pixels for now. And then obviously we have the frame rate setting that we can specify along with some other settings that we'll be talking about later. In regards to the duration, I'm just going to change the duration to 8 seconds. So I can just type in 800, and as soon as I leave this dialog box, it's going to convert it to 8 seconds. The time code here is going to represent hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So when we have something that looks like this, this is 8 seconds. You can also specify a background color for your project. I'll just use a black background for now, and I'll go ahead and click OK. Now that I've set up my composition, you can see a couple of things have changed. First of all, the composition window looks different. We now have controls that will allow us to control how we're viewing our project. The name of the composition is going to show up in the upper left-hand pane. Inside of my project panel, you can now see my composition. I am going to move this into the composition folder because that's where I want to keep it in order to stay organized. Moving down to the lower part of our project, you can see that the animation 1 composition is open. And currently we don't have anything in the composition, but this is the area that we're going to use to build our project. So we will arrange and edit our media assets to create the actual project using the timeline. The area on the left of the timeline is where we'll place various elements, and we will control them or keep them organized by using layers. The area on the right is going to be the actual timeline, and this is going to represent where our playback head is in time. The pane over here on the right is actually a series of panes. So when I click on these, you can see that various panes are going to open up. We don't really need to focus on any of these right now, but we will be looking at these as we move along. If you ever want to open any panel that is not active, you can always go to Window and you can choose the particular panel that you want to use, and it will bring it to the forefront or open it if it's not open. The toolbar in After Effects by default is located at the upper part of the screen. Some of these tools may look familiar to you. We have Selection Tool, Hand Tool, Zoom Tool. These are found in most of the other Adobe products. I have a few tools that are grayed out, and that's because I don't have any media active that I can use them on. And then I have some additional tools that will allow me to do various things. Throughout this section of the course, we're going to be learning about the different tools and how we can utilize them. But for right now, I'm going to start off by creating an element that I can use in my project. So I'm going to click down on the rectangle tool, and you'll notice there's a little triangle in the lower right-hand corner of some of the tools. This is an indication that these tools have sub-tools. So if we click and hold on that particular tool, we'll have access to these other tools. I'm going to choose an ellipse tool, and this will allow me to create an ellipse. I need to specify what my fill and stroke color are going to be. So for fill, I'm just going to pick a fill color. And for this particular example, I'll just select a light blue. I'm going to eliminate the stroke. So if I don't want a stroke to show, I can't change it here, but what I can do is just drag to the left and make sure that the stroke width is set to 0. Now I'm ready to create my circle. If I click, hold, and drag, and I want to draw a perfect circle, I'm going to add my Shift key. The Shift key will ensure that my shape is going to be constrained on all sides. If I release the Shift key, then I can create a unconstrained or unproportional type of shape. We want a perfect circle, so I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to drag a circle that's roughly this size. As soon as I move back to my selection tool, and the circle is now selected, and you can see that now down in my timeline, I have a new layer called Shape Layer. Currently, the Shape Layer is open. If you twirl the triangles, it toggles the various layers or parts of layers to be open and or closed. So when this is open, we can see that we have some other parameters that we can specify and set. These parameters are going to allow us to control all of the different aspects of the particular element that appears on the screen. So for instance, if I open up Ellipse, you can see that I have some options here. So if I decided later that I wanted to add a stroke, I could come into the stroke panel. And as you can see, when you start to open up some of these choices, there's a lot of things you can control. But one of these is stroke width. So if I increase the stroke width, I can add a stroke width. I'm going to return that back down to 0, but I did just want to point out that we can always make changes once we've created something. If we go to the ellipse path, this will allow me to change the size of my particular shape. So currently my shape is 222.6 by 222.6. If I want to change this to something else, I can simply type in a number. So if I type in 250, both the horizontal and vertical sizes are going to change. And that's because I have this little icon right here, the constrain proportions icon, selected, which is going to ensure that when I resize my shape, it resizes and keeps the constrained proportions. If I wanted to unconstrain them, I would need to uncheck this. But we're going to keep it checked because we want ours to be constrained. I'm going to twirl in the contents section, and then we have a transform section. The transform section is going to list all of the properties that you are able to change within After Effects. We have anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. I like to remember these by using the acronym of PARTS. That's because the keyboard shortcut for any of these is A for anchor point, P for position, S for scale, R for rotation, and opacity is actually T. So think opacity, and then you'll have the T. You'll see how these come into play in just a little bit. I'm going to change the name of this layer because shape layer 1 is not very descriptive. If you want to change a name of a layer, you simply select the layer and hit return or enter. And then we can go ahead and we can give this a more descriptive name. So I'm simply going to call this layer circle. In addition to my circle layer, I'm going to create another element into the timeline. This is going to be a solid. So in order to create a solid, we can go into Layer, New, Solid, or we can use the keyboard shortcut of Command Y. I'll go ahead and click this. This is going to open up my solid settings. We can give the solid a name, so you can give it a unique name. And I'm just going to change this to dark gray. The size by default is the size of your composition. If you want to change that, you can clearly come in here and change the values. And then we want to use pixels because that's what our project is going to use. Down here is where you can change the color of this. So if you click on the color, you can come in here and change it to any color that you might want. So for my solid, instead of using gray, actually let's make a dark blue. So I'm just going to select like a dark navy blue, and I'll change the name of this to navy solid. I'm going to click OK, and now you can see that our circle has disappeared. The circle is still there, it's just being obscured by the navy solid. Whatever layer is on the top of the stack in the timeline is going to be the layer that is in front of any other element. If I want this particular element to be behind the circle, I would need to grab the name and drag it down. And now you can see, here's our circle, and here is our navy solid. Hopefully now you'll know how to create a composition, some basic shapes within After Effects, and just how to do some simple modifications. Currently, we have no animation. We'll be learning how to do that next.